the US dollar will become more dominant than ever in the next few years. It's January 5th, 2023. Please subscribe. The US dollar is the world's premier currency for the last 80 years. Nothing is forever, but the end of the US dollar is not in sight. As the global economic and political crisis increases, possibly the worst ever, the flight into the dollar will surge. It's considered a safe haven because the US is self-sufficient in food and energy. It has a system of the rule of law. It's considered a democracy. It has no capital controls. And it has the most powerful military. Also, interest rates in the US are much higher than in the rest of the world, especially Europe and Japan, and rising faster. The American Federal Reserve is withdrawing dollar liquidity sharply in the last 6 months. QT, it's called, quantitative tightening, as they normalize the monetary policy. But there is still a long way to go. And that's why there is a dollar shortage everywhere. Because the world's debt is 80% in dollars, which has to be rolled over, refinanced. Why is so much debt in US dollars? Because the dollar is liquid. And if you have a bond in dollars, you can sell it anywhere in the world. And that's not true in any other currency. But if you have a debt in US dollars, you're effectively short the dollar, and you may have to cover, you may have to buy the dollar. That puts a floor under the dollar. Everything is relative, but the dollar has now gone up for 14 years, but is just back up to the level of 20 years ago. And that's because after the great financial crisis, after the euro crisis, after the pandemic, after the European war, there was a flight in the dollar. And the dollar index went up. But there is a lot of envy, of course, because the dollar has been weaponized, and that could be a problem long term. But for the moment, 88% of all global transactions are in dollars. 60% of all international reserves are in dollars, and it's gone up after it had declined a little bit. Even the pound sterling is 4.6% of international reserves. Yen is 5.3% of international reserves, and rates are going up in Japan. But the Chinese renminbi only has 2.8% of the reserves. But that's because of their capital controls. In the meantime, the US dollar is floating around the world, $7 trillion. And 65 countries have pegged their currency to the dollar. And 8 countries are fully dollarized, where the dollar is legal tender. But the main point is 95% of all global trade is financed with dollars held outside of the US. The so-called euro dollar has nothing to do with the euro. And that's a system that has evolved since World War II. But, of course, there is huge pressure on some countries when the dollar rises in value. Not only the value in the dollar debt goes up, but the shortages increase. And from time to time, the American Federal Reserve has to help out central banks with dollars. But there's a lot of talk about a new monetary system, a commodity-based system, or even a gold-based system. Nothing is forever. We'll have to see how this develops. The US dollar could remain a reserve asset because of its liquidity, while the Chinese renminbi could become more important as a payment currency for trade, supply chain, and commodity markets. Because it seems like the globalization is over, and in an era of deglobalization, we could have several blocks. We'll have to see. But the end of the US dollar is not in sight at all. Thank you, and till next time, and please subscribe. All the best for the new year.